Eve of Souls Static Pod was an RPGMaker horror game released on Steam in 2019. It gained a burst of popularity taking inspiration from titles like The Witch's House and Yomawari. It initially was titled as an early access game with a new chapter coming out per update. The game's story is supposed to have 5 chapters total and 3 had been officially released by 2021. But ever since then, for the past 2 years, there's been little to no new content for the game besides minor comments from the dev here and there. Apparently, the developer has medical issues coupled with their own busy life, and the development of the game has come to a crashing halt. Recently, they sent out a new update saying not to expect any dates in the future for content updates, as in the last 2 chapters are going to most likely take more years if not be abandoned entirely. Regardless of whether we get those chapters or not, it does have a very interesting story and established narrative that I want to jump into right now, followed up by some theories I have about the main character. Eve of Souls revolves around the protagonist, Sha, specifically her phobia known as ligophobia, which is a severely irrational fear of the dark, but there's something more to it. Her mental state is constantly questioned as the game plays out, and her environment changes in her nightmares. Sha's terror of the dark is so immense that she is prescribed medication to make the thoughts and anxiety go away at nighttime. She feels eyes all around herself watching her every move if there is no light. To me, that doesn't stem from a normal childlike fear. She has extreme anxiety about something, and the dark doesn't cause it directly. It only adds to it. Sha's concern of the dark is just a facade for something else in my opinion. Phobias don't usually come to be for no reason. Firstly, I assume Sha has another phobia, of being watched. Eyeballs appear in the game all around her when night comes. She puts her hands on her head and cradles herself, wanting them to go away when this happens. Coupled with the fact that she says she has trouble socializing with people, I don't think the eyes are about people looking at her, but more about people judging her. She doesn't want to be seen for who she is. I believe the eyeballs are supposed to symbolize Sha's guilt. Guilt specifically fostered in her by a tragic event. There are many context clues in the first 3 chapters that show this, but 2 primary examples stuck out to me through the game. It's seeming like she feels terrible about something she did, and in turn, herself, obviously. She represses the feelings and doesn't want people to see the supposed trait she's trying to hide. This is later enforced by a scene with a classmate where Sha says she has social issues and infers she has trouble making friends. The lights are out at her school, but her classmate says she is also scared of the dark. This lessens the weight on Sha, and her worries turn to happiness. She doesn't fear the girl anymore, only because the other girl did the work to relate to Sha herself. She actually enjoys walking through the school with her. Being with her completely assuages her fear of being in the dark in this moment. This already takes down Sha's fear of the dark in my mind. If all she needs is another person to make her fears go away, then that seems like a fear of something else, not a fear of nighttime. She can't make friends on her own because she doesn't try to, but if another person comes up to her and does it for her, she's okay with it, and then she doesn't have to worry about anything anymore. It seems like she lacks friends and people around her, which leads to an immense fear of being alone, not of the dark. More plot details later show that she lost her brother named Yang, and somebody else named Yep. Yep is revealed to be her doll she made when she was younger. We have no idea the events surrounding Yang's death beyond the fact that she repressed it and forces herself to forget him entirely. She has self-deluded her entire mind to completely block out the memory of him by the time the game begins. Throughout the first 3 chapters, it's like Sha can't make out certain details, and instead of contemplating them, she takes her mind-numbing sleepy pills, as she calls them, to make the bad thoughts dissipate. At the end of chapter 3, we meet Yep, her old doll, in one of her nightmares. Yep explains that Sha blamed Yep for the death of her brother Yang. Nothing else was added onto that because Sha purposefully blanks it out. I assume this meant her brother must have died because of something involving Sha misplacing Yep or something similar to that. Which would make sense why Sha would think it's her fault that her brother died, and because she's a kid, she tells Yep, her doll, that it's actually Yep's fault. This made her feel good for a moment, leading her to get rid of Yep entirely, and blaming it all on Yep and disposing of her helped her block out the memories of her brother because the doll happened to be present at Yang's death, I'm assuming. That's why I see the eyes as her guilt complex, and anything that judges her is a monster to her because she's a child, and blaming everything around her helps her keep her mind off herself. I think this basic idea is what leads to her nightmare world, and the creatures that attack could be judgments and criticisms about how she sees herself. She loved her brother and wants friends around her just like he was. She's not scared of the dark, she just won't allow herself to be anything but alone. She's just too scared because of what happened to her brother. I think it's near obvious that her phobia is caused by her brother's death at the end of chapter 3. And if it's not, then that just means that there is actually no explanation but happenstance, which I think is even more unlikely. Since all my thinking and theories basically stem from Yang's death, I want to dig in more on how I think it happened. I believe Shaw's trouble with the dark had always been prevalent in her, but not a severe disease to her life at this point. She was just a kid with normal fears, but she may have misplaced Yep, her doll, one night, and it's implied that Shaw slept with her doll since it helped her with bedtime. Maybe she left Yep at her school and forgot about it until it was like nighttime, or maybe she just misplaced Yep somewhere outside or something. Then since she couldn't sleep without Yep, she asked her brother Yang to go get Yep in her place. Yang goes out and something happens to him, maybe a car crash or anything like that. None of the details actually matter, but the situation is prevalent to why Shaw would feel like she caused her brother's death and need to blame something else. Then, from that event, draw out what could be a lifelong phobia of nighttime. If she blames her fears and her brother's demise on the dark, it would only enhance what she was already scared of, pushing it to a senseless degree. I could be off on this part because I know it's rare for phobias to develop at later ages, but that's why I said that the only other explanation would literally be no explanation. Which I don't believe is the case. This developer seems like they had this plot thought out. The game is detailed from the beginning, and with its influences, I have to believe that there's something there. There's just too many context clues and too much build up throughout the game towards her mental state. There's another event that we will probably see revealed in chapter 4 with the parents. When we're introduced to the family at the beginning of the game, at first glance, they seem pretty mundane and happy. They have family meals, and Shaw and her mom joke around with each other. Shaw's dad scolds her on various things in what seems like a parental care sort of way. Nothing seems too far from the ordinary at first. Later on, however, we see the father drinks and smokes to cope with something. Although that is also unexplained currently, besides the obvious dead son narrative, the mother is seen talking to what Shaw believes to be her job throughout the game, but her mom walks away from her to speak to whoever's on the other line, and this seems clear that it's alluding to something involving Shaw specifically. Her mom doesn't want her to hear the phone call. There's two thoughts in my head about what this could be. One, Shaw probably has a medical condition with an actual name beyond lycophobia. She might have some form of a psychological illness like schizophrenia, which is why she always has prescribed pills. Though if that were true, I feel like the parents would be more involved with making her take them. It could be a minor version of that, like a brain impairment from trauma. I feel like that's a lot more likely. But before I say my second theory, let me summarize things really quickly. Everything I've said thus far is my general theory on the explanation of Shaw's psychosis and how the remaining chapters will play out her character development. The game is supposed to have branching endings depending on the choices you make, so I assume if Shaw owns up to herself, her past and all, she will be able to break the chains of her phobia and move on from the grief of her brother and receive a good ending. The bad ending probably means she will be swallowed by her pain instead, and the game talks about survival, so for her not to face reality will probably lead to the end of her life. Back to the phone call now that I've wrapped up my thoughts on Shaw. The way the scene played out with the mom and the context of Shaw blaming everything but her own self led to me thinking her complete mental shutdown may have been caused by my second and last theory of a less likely truth. She could have actually killed her own brother. There's not enough knowledge on Shaw herself to see her motivations as to why she would do it. Maybe it was still an accident, but simply caused by her own hand. This would explain the parents' behavior if they knew about it as well. The father can't cope because he's covering for the murder of his son, and the mom walking away from Shaw when she got a phone call might mean that it wasn't a doctor on the other end, but an investigator or a cop. They're either closing in on Yang's murder and the parents are wary, or the opposite. Maybe Shaw killed Yang and the parents don't know, so they're the ones who hired someone to find out what happened. I'm not going to overcomplicate that because obviously I think it's less likely that that's the case, especially since we've gotten enough of Shaw's personality to surmise she's not actually crazy, just tortured. but since we may never see the end of this interesting game, I thought I'd speak on any and all paths of what it could be in my mind. There's also a lot of subtext in Shaw's nightmare world that I didn't touch on because I didn't want to make a little character analysis video too long, but I just assumed her nightmares were metaphorical, though the night world she goes into could be very real as well, which would switch the narrative completely and probably destroy a lot of my theories on the direction of the game. That's pretty much it for the bulk of my thoughts that I found interesting enough to talk about. Shaw is compelling as a character from the first 10 minutes of the game's intro, and wherever it's headed, I've enjoyed the writing so far. Eve of Souls Static Pod is a very intriguing RPGMaker horror game that does stand up with its predecessors. I hope we see the light at the end of the tunnel for the development to finish soon. The indie dev behind this game is clearly very creative, and I wish them the best with their work. Thanks for watching all the way through if you did. I was looking to make some more short indie character analysis videos like this in the future, so let me know what lesser known characters you find interesting. Otherwise, tell me your thoughts on the game and what you think the narrative is leading to. Feel free to correct me as well. I only played this once through, so there's a good chance I missed a note or two. And as always, subscribe and like and all that if you want to. Goodbye!